Well, hello there, APHUG team. This is Sanchez with our first flipped lecture for Unit 3. And today's video lecture is going to focus on the demographic transition model, aka the DTM. Alright, before we get started for today, just a quick reminder, make sure that you have your Geo logbook out ready to go. We have introduced several models that may work for your note-taking, so choose one that you think best suits how you can organize and review the material. Some suggestions that we've gone through previously is the Cornell note method with our left-hand column and our summary at the bottom. Another strategy perhaps would be our 3-column notes. Another format that's worked quite nicely is an outline method. And then some students find use of what is called a mind map, where you use more visuals and symbols to organize the information. Just remember at the bottom I did remind you to get full credit on the logbook. After the video lecture, taking the notes in our different stages, provide evidence of annotation or talking to the text, evidence of highlighting, evidence of writing questions to go back and review, or of course evidence of the fact that you've taken this lecture and now read key issue number 3 and now you've added additional or supplemental information. So remember, make the notes work for you, not just necessarily copying down word for word the lecture, but making use that you can actually memorize and actually apply this model. The DTM is a model that is definitely going to come in handy, and I guarantee you will pop up somewhere on the AP Human Geography exam in May. Alright, before we get started with the DTM, you don't need to copy all of this down into your notebook, but just kind of general overview. Remember, we're still starting our discussion regarding population, where people are living, why are they living there, looking for trends, looking at population density. In this case, we're looking at this slide right here, Earth's population history. So you can see sort of the building blocks in terms of how we have grown to a number over 7 billion people across the planet. So in this case, kind of shows you the stepping stones of how we reach that number. In class, we watched that little video clip to kind of remind you of kind of like the different cylinders of the different clusters that we see, which are highly densely populated. So remember, we're only talking about population in terms of where humans can habitate. We've talked about, of course, where humans like to live and where they don't like to live, too hot, too cold, too dry, too wet, etc. But the DTM kind of explains how we've reached this overall over 7 billion members on the planet. Alright, the DTM model explaining spatial patterns of world population growth. And the demographic transition model has a number of uses. You should kind of think of this model, it's kind of a central concept to understand a lot of the units in the course. Not only is this how population changes over time, but it also provides geographers it provides its insights to issues of migration, which we're going to get to in Chapter 3, fertility, economic development. You're going to find when we look through these models, it sounds very familiar to our discussion of Rostow's possible stages of development, urbanization, labor, politics, and the roles of women. So this really kind of gives us some insight of what's going on in the country, just looking at the population trends. Alright, so what you have on the screen is the actual classic model of the demographic transition model. And what it gives us, it's a chart that goes across time. Basically, it's helps us predict changes in birth, death rates, rates of natural increase. You can see right here we have the classic model has 4 different stages, which we're going to look at each stage at a time. Also, again, more modern geographers and some other texts will reference that we have what is called a 5th stage, which we see countries now are going through a declining population. And I also want to point out right here at the top, we have this kind of corresponds with your textbook. In key issue number 3, it's going to talk about something called the S-curve. Now this S-curve is going to represent the total population, and the S-curve is going to be the population number in the DTM. And as you can see on the screen, the total population begins to increase dramatically in stage number 2. We see that big jump, and then we're eventually going to see it sort of stabilize or mellow out over here in stage number 4. So we're going to look at each of these stages and kind of talk about where we see the population increase and what is accounting in each stage of this model. Here's in the graphic, just looking at the DTM. So finally, I just want to mention before we move on to the different stages that remember this is a model, and as geographers we know that all models are not 100% perfect. We know that countries don't look exactly the same. There's lots of different reasons that will alter or necessarily not make them fit in the cookie cutter model. And I also want to say that it's also very difficult for us to necessarily understand the different stages 1, 2, 3, and 4, until a country really goes through the stages, because we can't necessarily identify the trends or the increase or the decrease in death rates until actually kind of looking back. But we can definitely say another thing to look on the screen. You can see stage 1 we're going to identify as low growth. We're going to see stage 2 has high growth. This is the most crucial stage, especially if we're discussing issues of overpopulation. Stage 3 we're going to identify as more of a moderate growth, and stage 4 we also have low growth. But we'll talk about, again, stage 1 and stage 4 have low growth for two different types of reasons. Alright, let's go ahead and start taking a look at stage 1 of the DTM model, which is known as pre-industrial, or sometimes also noted as hunting and gathering subsistence societies. In this case, in our last model, remember the pink line is representing of the birth rate. So see that birth rates are high, and this kind of wavy blue line is going to indicate the death rate. So we also see that death rates, the CDR and the CBR are both high, which indicates we have a low growth. Now, there are several things that we could take away from this particular stage. We say that they're underdeveloped or a primitive society. Usually in this case, most societies in this model are just basic survival. We don't necessarily have sustainable agriculture, or we don't necessarily have trade, really no technology, no access to medicine. In this case, we have very high rates of communicable diseases since we do not have access to medicine or vaccine. So we see particularly in this stage that people are having lots of kids because the kids are not surviving. So if a family chooses to have several children, they know that in many respects that the few of those children, maybe half of those children, will pass away from some of the basic things, like not having access to proper nutrition or a stable food supply, or again, if there's some sort of disease going around the village, maybe not necessarily having access to anything to treat that. So children, again, have a higher mortality rate because, again, they're not as developed and they're more susceptible for these types of things to occur to increase their death rate. Now at the bottom right there, it says no country or world region is still in stage 1. Most geographers believe we don't necessarily have a country that's in this particular stage of the DTM model. You can maybe make an argument if we're talking about maybe people living in the Amazon rainforest, maybe again subsistence lifestyle, but we definitely say there's no country that's officially in stage 1 of the DTM. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to stage 2 of the DTM, which is sometimes labeled early industrial or also agricultural societies. Alright, in stage 2, we definitely see on the screen right here, we have an increase or a high growth rate of population. You can see right here that pink line indicates the CBR versus the blue line, which is going to be the CDR, which is the death rate. So we definitely see a dramatic decline in the death rate, and that's due to a multitude of reasons. Number one, we see an increase in food supply. So remember, in stage 1, one of the reasons why we had a high death rate is because access to a stable food supply, possible areas of starvation, or children, again, getting sick because they didn't have proper nutrition. So in stage 2, we usually see, again, due to the agricultural revolution, there's an increase in food production. People are eating healthier, they're surviving, and they're living longer. We can also say in stage 2, we have an improvement of sanitation. So access to, again, cleaner conditions, access to clean drinking water, those types of things. Now we do see the birth rate stays about the same. It's not towards the end of the stage that we begin seeing that decline. So that would be significant in terms of people begin realizing that children are living longer. And again, a family perhaps would have 8 children, thinking that maybe 4 of them would pass away. Towards the end of the stage, they begin realizing, children are living longer. Maybe we don't necessarily need to have a huge family, and that birth rate starts to dwindle out. Now at the bottom of the screen, I want you to jot down, it says MDC starts early 1800s. So if we're looking at the more Western European model, we could definitely say stage 2 is more on the onset of the agricultural revolution, early industrial revolution. But notice at the bottom it says LDCs start after the 1950s. So we're talking about LDCs more so Latin America or Africa, for example, because we see in that time period the diffusion of what is called the medical revolution, where now more MDCs are diffusing the medicine and best practices that is going to increase, or excuse me, is going to decrease that death rate. So for example, there are still many African countries still in stage 2 today, and you can tell that a country is in stage 2 of the DTM by comparing its birth and death rates with the current world average. So in a stage 2 country, both the birth rate and the death rate are higher than the world averages. So example, Angola, which is located in Central Africa, had in 2013, I think, a birth rate of 47 and a death rate of 15, which are well above the world averages. Liberia is another good example of a stage 2 country with a birth rate of 36 and a death rate of 10. All right, and then finally on the screen right now, you can see kind of a summary. You don't necessarily need to copy this down word for word, but just to be familiar, kind of some big picture ideas, the transition to stage 2. So we definitely already mentioned that part of stage 2 is an improvement in agricultural technology, improvements in the food supply due to our agricultural revolution, and also in our next unit, when we get into the agriculture for our unit of study, we'll talk about the fact that Europe is also during this time period going to have improvement of food quality, which is going to be foods introduced from the Americas, looking at the Columbian Exchange, but we'll get there. Number 2 big idea is, of course, better medical technology. So better medical understanding, causes of diseases, how they spread, how to treat them, vaccines, medicine, etc. And then finally, another big idea would be public sanitation technology. So improve water supply, safe drinking water, better sewage treatment, food handling, and overall personal hygiene.